My name's Cara Walton, and I'm the Director of Market Intelligence at Harbour Results. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you guys a lot about what we're seeing in the medical market. We do a lot in the automotive space. We do a lot in the aerospace industry. You saw my boss, Lori Harbour, present earlier today. If you saw the keynote out on the floor about the BEV market specifically, I'm going to take some cuts of the data more specifically into the medical side of the things and talk to you guys about that in more detail. So we are a manufacturing consulting firm, and we're based in Southfield, Michigan, so not too far away from here. I personally live in Brooklyn, New York, but I did get my start in the Detroit area, so I spent a lot of time in many mold and die makers locally and also across the US. We do a lot in operational improvements. We do business assessment work. We will focus on strategic development. What do your sales strategies look like? What is your vision, mission, and values for your organization? How are we investing? We also do a lot of custom analysis benchmarking, and all of this is powered by what we call Harbour IQ. That's where myself and my team come into play. Harbour IQ is a database, and I'll give you a little bit more insight on the data. It is a massive database that has about 10,000 companies worth of data sitting in it right now, maybe more like 12,000 today. What we do is we take trended data for financials, operations, human resources, and sales and marketing from all different types of manufacturers. We work with mold and die makers, which sounds like as many of you in this room. We also work with contract machine shops. We work with metal formers. We work with die casters. We work with plastics processors. We work with fasteners. We work with custom and chemical coaters. You name it. If we don't have any data on them yet, I'm very interested in getting data on them in the future. But what we get to do with all that information is we have about 600 companies who participate in our surveys every single year. My selfish plug, our benchmarking study is currently live. We would love to have data from mold and die makers and all types of processors and any type of manufacturer in it. If you give us your data, you get a really comprehensive, usually 100 and 150 page report back from our team. No charge, no catch. You just got to give us your data. We will aggregate it and we will give it back to you. If you'd like to participate, please take a business card from me or give me your business card. I will have someone from our team send you a link probably before the end of the day. So with that, this is just a little bit of the detail on the data. In a couple of slides, I'm going to start to say what the data shows is, this is what I mean when I talk about that data. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about some of the medical manufacturing benchmarks. So kind of the request from Makino was to talk about the medical market. So I took it in 3 different categories. First one is what does our data show? So what is data for medical manufacturers? And when I say medical manufacturers, I mean the tier 2s and tier 3s. So I mean those of you making the molds and dies in the medical space. I mean the customers, so your plastics processors that you're supplying to, or your contract machine shops, or your stampers. Those are the types of companies that I refer to in that. That'll be the first section. And then I want to talk more specifically about the market. So we'll talk about some of the bigger players. What are we seeing happening in the overall medical marketplace from a manufacturing perspective in North America? And then I will end it with where to from here. The joke last night, I was talking to a couple people from Makino, was that if I could just put a slide up here that shows you the person to call at every single medical manufacturer that sources molds and dies, then I could just stand here and let you look at that Excel file. I don't have that. I apologize. If I did, I would give it to you. But I do have a lot of intel on the market to share with you. So let's start with those specific medical benchmarks. Our organization did a study in the first quarter of this year that we do quarterly. And what we look at in that data is a couple different things. One thing that we term the Harbour IQ Manufacturing Index. What we do with that index is we take data about forecasted capacity utilization, forecasted hiring levels, what's your quote level like, what's your revenue plan, and how are you feeling about the marketplace. What we've done for the sake of this study is cut it specifically by industry. Medical and dental is highlighted right here. What you see across all of these industries is that they're up. This is some of what Lori talked about earlier today. There's a disconnect for us in the marketplace where many of you are slow in your businesses. Some of you are doing quite well, but many are a little bit slower, and yet we're really optimistic about the future. What we're seeing, especially in the medical space, and then also heavy truck, which has the highest HIQ index number right now, is that there is more work starting to come. So quote levels are starting to pick up in some cases. There's a really big Navistar program out there right now for anyone in the heavy truck space. There are some things that are happening that show us positivity, but we're just not there yet. So the intention of this index is to be forward looking. So it means that we're getting there. Medical was pretty high at 66, although not the highest. As I said, that was heavy truck, and then packaging came in close behind it. A lot of work in the consumer packaging space right now as well. A couple other things that we found really interesting in the data when we started to cut it all by specific process type. So what you're looking at here is revenue growth expectations. What we did in the first quarter of this year is we asked our manufacturers, we said, okay, We understand that you're closing out your 2023 year. What is your revenue plan for 2024? Do you expect to grow, and by how much? On average, medical manufacturers only expect to grow by about 3.8%. Positive growth rate, obviously we like to see improvement in growth. My caveat to this and my challenge to you guys is just because your top line revenue is growing doesn't necessarily mean, especially in today's marketplace, that whatever you're doing within your own four walls is growing. So we look a lot at value add revenue to better understand with material cost and with outsourcing cost, are you actually growing your revenue within your own four walls? Or is your top line revenue going up, but it's just following your material cost going up or your heat treating costs going up or other aspects that I'm sure those of you in mold dye know very well. But nonetheless, we're really excited about a 3.8% growth rate for medical. The biggest growth industry is aerospace. I know that's also an industry that Makino spends a lot of time in. The aerospace market is doing extremely well. There's a lot of new demand, both in the mold and dye space, but also in the contract machining space and some other areas. I really like this slide. It's a little bit of an eye chart, so I apologize for that. But what we did on this data is we cut down to tool shops specifically. So the data I was showing you guys previously was for all manufacturers. This data is more specifically for tool shops. There's been a discussion in the tooling industry for many years now that we want to diversify outside of automotive. If you haven't heard that, let me know who you're talking to, because I hear it almost every single day in the mold and dye shops that I speak to. What we've seen from 2021 to 2024 is that the percentage of total revenue that a mold and dye shop has in automotive is going down substantially. Now, I want to clarify, this doesn't mean that mold and dye shops are getting out of the automotive market. It means that they're still doing automotive work, but they're also going into other sectors. So they're doing aerospace work, they're doing medical work, they're doing packaging work. So what you're seeing here is in 2021, it was 84% average revenue for a mold or dye maker. By 2024, it's down to 57%. So we have successfully diversified. The thing that I find more interesting is that every single industry behind this, so these are all the other industries, have changed almost every single year. So all of them are one of the ones listed here below. So medical was about 21% of the total revenue in 2021, only 4% in 2022. It didn't hit top 5 in 2023 for our data set. What's interesting about that is because of some of the challenges with COVID, we had this massive increase in demand for production and also tooling in 2021, dropped a little bit in 2022 in the medical space, and then we kind of took a pause on launching a lot of new product in 2023. A lot of the medical mold and dye makers that I work with didn't have great years in 2023. Now, the good news is it's starting to tick up again in 2024, and we expect that to continue. I'll talk more about why that is in the market intelligence side of things. But there are also a lot of other industries that are at play here. This 30% is heavy truck. So that's a couple of the big heavy truck programs that are coming out right now. This 30%, if I remember correctly, was aerospace. So we did see a lot of aerospace demand back in 2023, even before the Boeing crisis that occurred. And now we're starting to see some increasing in some of the sourcing there because we're retooling some things or pivoting into other sectors. A couple of the other pieces of data from a benchmark perspective, and then I'll go into the state of the market. I brought up the value add revenue piece before. What this is efficiency by primary industry. The way our organization measures efficiency, just to give you that brief update. We look at value add revenue per full-time equivalent. So what we do is we take the total revenue in your organization, we take out all material content and all outsourcing, because at the end of the day, those aren't things that you're doing within the 4 walls of your facility, or 8 walls or 12 walls, depending on how many plants you have. It's not things that you're doing within your own facility. Then we divide that number by your full-time equivalent. So we take your total salaried employees and just count them as one. We take your hourly employees and any temps, and we adjust for overtime. What that gives us is basically a metric that is your value add revenue per full-time equivalent. The reason why our organization loves this metric so much is because every time you increase that by $1,000, $2,000, you are funneling the vast majority of that down to your bottom line. So quickly, what I'll tell you is if you have 100 people in your plant and you increase your value add revenue per full-time equivalent by $10,000 per employee, you just funneled at least 80% of that revenue directly down to EBIT because you've done more with the exact same number of people. So the reason why I bring that up to you, twofold. Number one, it's a great operational metric to measure the efficiency of your business. Number two, medical manufacturers are sitting at about 121 per full-time equivalent. Now my challenge, this is 2022 data. That survey that I talked to you about is where we're collecting 2023 data. So I don't have 2023 information for you yet. I will, and I'm happy to share that with you guys after we collect that data. But nonetheless, what we saw in 2022 is that medical manufacturers were doing quite well from an efficiency perspective. It is not a coincidence. They actually were somehow identical to automotive. So there were many really, really good automotive mold and die makers that are also doing extremely well in the medical space. Again, the only industry to outperform them, and this is really just a sign of the times, was heavy truck. The one thing I will tell you about the heavy truck market that consistently is showing up on here, there are very few mold and die makers that only do heavy truck work. It's super cyclical, it goes every 7 years. You can't be a mold and die maker that relies exclusively on heavy truck. There's a couple exceptions to that. If any of you sit in this room, I apologize, but I don't think you do. But for the most part, the reason why we're seeing some improvement is that these heavy truck guys, that at least 50% of their revenue is in that market, are also very good at managing a lot of different programs in a lot of different industries. So oftentimes their efficiency is better because they're managing heavy truck programs while also doing some automotive, while also doing some appliance, while also doing some packaging, and they're improving their efficiency and really operationally doing very well. It's not just because they're in the heavy truck market. The same comment does go for medical. Just being in the medical market doesn't make you have $121,000 per full-time equivalent. That requires work within your own facility to improve your operational efficiency to continue getting there, but it is a good market to be in. A couple other benchmarks on the medical side that I found interesting when we were analyzing this data. Machine uptime. Medical is about 63% total machine uptime on average for manufacturers that we see in the data set. I don't know about you guys, but 63% is a little low for what I'd want to see if I own machines or if I'm someone sitting in a place like Makino. I like my uptime to be a little bit more than 63%. Heavy truck, again, outperformed, and they were the highest based off the most recent data we have at 81%. The low end, so consumer products, was the lowest from a machine uptime perspective, and that was 55. So medical is doing better than what we saw on the low end, but still there's opportunity for improvement. The thing that I find really interesting here, our machine uptime is a little bit lower in medical than in some other sectors, but we're still really operationally efficient. So clearly we have a lot of good things going for us if we're in that space. We're probably launching product very well. We're probably pricing very well. We're probably gaining relationships with our customers and our suppliers to maybe leverage buy or do certain things to manage our costs accordingly. SG&A as a percent of revenue. This is a really important one in the medical market. Medical has the highest SG&A as a percent of total revenue cost of any industry that we see in manufacturers. Generally speaking, being in the medical market does require more overhead cost. You either have exotic materials that are requiring you to have additional purchasing people, you have additional project managers that have to work on very specific programs or have certain types of certifications. By no means a deterrent to the market, as I showed you in some of the prior data. It's a great market to be in, but you got to be aware of the shortcomings as well. 12.8% average SG&A, per of revenue versus the lowest was actually the agriculture industry at 8.1. So it does cost a little bit of money. There are some barriers to entry that we'll talk about, but it is a good market to be in. Last piece, I love to talk about cash conversion cycles because for those of you in tooling, sometimes it takes a really long time to get paid. Does anyone feel that, or we all get paid within 10 days? Yeah. Have we ever gotten paid within 10 days? Nope. Okay, good. If you have, I really want to know who your customers are. But what we look at is cash conversion cycle. This is for all manufacturers. So there's production suppliers in here. Medical cash conversion cycle is 88 days. If I were to cut this for tooling specifically, that number would spike at least up to 160, probably more like 175, 180. I've had tool shops that have reported me cash conversion cycles that are 380 days, and I've called them and said, this is a typo, and they've said, no, it's not. It's a rough industry to be in with cash conversion cycles. But medical is doing relatively well at their 88 days. Second highest behind that is automotive. But again, this is for production. If you're in automotive tooling, oftentimes my suppliers say that your payment terms are net never, or it's just progressive billing, not progressive payment. So they're not getting paid often. So that's a little bit of the benchmarking data that I wanted to share to kind of start things off. What I want to pivot into now is what we see more in the industry as a whole. But I'll pause for a second. Any questions, anything that I went through that you guys are like, what's she talking about? I'm the only thing between you guys and a cocktail hour, I think, so. No one's going to have a beer at 4? I'm going to have a beer on my flight home. All right, well, say that again? Back to New York? Yes, yeah. That I live in Brooklyn? I feel sorry for my rent payments too. So let's talk about what we see in the broader industry. What I want to start off with is some of the large manufacturing markets. Primarily, there's a lot of manufacturing that occurs in the transportation industry. We see it in automotive, we see it in heavy truck, many of those types of markets. I'm intentionally focusing on non-light and auto vehicle in here. So yes, that is a massive number at this 327, but a couple of the other markets that I think are interesting. Medical instruments and devices at about 154, so a very large industry market per year. So that's the annual amount that we generally see in medical manufacturing. Technically speaking, when you look at a lot of data, they differentiate between instruments and devices. Devices are more things that are in or near the body. So if you think about like cardiac monitors or knee replacements, I believe someone in this room is getting a knee replacement here shortly. I have a rotator cuff anchor that's also considered a device because it anchors my ball and socket joint together because I don't have a rotator cuff. Those are devices. Instruments are more things that would be around the body or not necessarily in direct correlation. The reason why we care about that is because it's clean room related, right? What level of clean room do you have to supply to many of these sectors? But those two industries combined sit at about 154 with a compounded annual growth rate, of about 2.5%. For reference, if anybody supplies into the appliance industry, good industry to be in, far smaller. So great sometimes to supply into the appliance market, but again, similar to heavy truck, you can't only be in that market. You could be predominantly or exclusively in the medical industry, and you could have a lot of different opportunities for where you supply to. Same comment comes on aerospace. Aerospace is slightly larger than medical at about 220. But again, as Lori talked about earlier today, auto is still the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Doesn't mean there's not benefits in other sectors, though. The medical market specifically is poised for a lot of growth as we go forward. So this is, again, their annual numbers for medical manufacturing in the US specifically. 2023 was that 154 number that we just talked about. Expectation to get to about 180 by 2028. What I find more interesting in this chart, rather than just putting a whole heck of a lot of bars in front of you, if you go all the way back to 2010, we were at $157 billion. By 2023, we were at 154. So we actually went down over the last 13 years. I don't know about you guys, but my initial question when I look at this data is, so are we really going to go up by $25 billion between 2023 and 2028? The answer, in our opinion, at Harbour is yes, and here is why that is. This is the share of the US population that is 65 years or older. In 1950, which was obviously a very long time ago, but in 1950, 8% of the population was 65 years and older. Come 2050, 22% of the population is expected to be 65 years and older. Now, there's many reasons for this. One of them is because we have a massive population that's starting to age all at the same time. Lots of baby boomers. Another aspect of this, and I was very kindly reminded by some of my friends in the industry, is that some young people are choosing not to have children as soon as some people did in prior years. What does that do? That means that the average person 65 years and older is going up. What does that mean? It means that we need a lot more medical products in order to sustain having a massive aging population. So it's a great market to be in, and that's something that those of you who are already in it may know. But the other thing to remember is that everybody knows it's a great market to be in. So you do have some people that are trying to diversify into your space if you're already in it today. I do want to be careful, though. There's a lot of positivity in the medical market, but it's not fully insulated. There are still some challenges. So I was talking with many people from Makino earlier today, because obviously they do a lot in the medical space, and there is some slowness happening in pockets of it. From our perspective at Harbour, part of the reason why that is because of the price of medical care. Over here on the left-hand side, you're looking at the CPI, so that's basically the inflation specifically for medical care. It has gone up dramatically, and this is just from 2020 to 2024. We dropped down a little bit in 2023 because what we started to have happen is we peaked in medical care, then we kind of stopped going to hospitals for a while because we didn't really know what was happening in the medical market. And now people are starting to demand care again, but the price is extremely high. So what does that mean? Why do I care about that? Because today, it's 2023 data, but take it for what it's worth, 38% of US households are putting off medical costs or medical procedures due to cost. It's the highest number it has ever been. For reference, back in COVID, right, this 33%, the initial jump that we saw because of COVID, went down a little bit when we paused, but now is up at the highest it's ever been. For reference, even back during the Great Recession, we didn't go above 30%. So what this tells me is that there's a lot of opportunities in the medical market. Talking about some of the threats in the industry, right, there is a portion of the population that's choosing not to have medical care. We are starting to see that impact some things, but as people get older, it's a little bit inevitable, right? We are going to see increased demand, so it is a positive market for us to be in. But one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, and someone from our team put this together and I found it really interesting, they kind of tiered threats to the medical manufacturing industry in 3 different levels. The bottom level, so this is kind of like the least concerning stuff, but things that you do need to be aware of. Inflation, which we've already talked about. Skilled labor, yes, it's a challenge, but in my opinion, skilled labor is going to be a challenge no matter what manufacturing industry you're in. So might as well go in one that has better operational efficiency, that has better pricing, that pays you more often. Additive manufacturing, there's pros and cons to this one, right? For those of you in the tooling space, there could be some competition in the future when more things are manufactured from an additive perspective, but it's not there right now, so we still have time on that. And overall, the ability to get certain materials, especially some more exotic materials that you might see in some of the medical space, it is a risk. If we go up a level, kind of the more concerning risks, all things counterfeiting, there isn't up-to-date data that we've seen since 2010, but even in 2010, 8% of all medical devices were counterfeit. I assume, and this is purely an assumption based off macro data, that that number has at least doubled by today. So there is a risk of counterfeit of medical devices that's happening, especially in a lot of Asian countries. Doesn't mean that it's directly impacting all of your businesses, but is part of the benefit, and frankly is a good thing for mold and die makers. There's a lot of medical manufacturers that are far more focused on sourcing in North America to prevent counterfeiting of certain types of devices. At the end of the day, you guys know this better than I do. If you have a mold design, you can figure out how to make the part, right? The IP is in the design of the mold. It's not in the actual part itself. So that's something that they're watching closely. The most concerning one, just from a medical manufacturing perspective to talk about really briefly, is the cybersecurity side of things. This is a big concern in all of manufacturing, but for anybody who I think was related with United Healthcare, they had a massive security breach, and basically everybody's social security number was put out there to do what you want with. If you have ever worked with United, please go ahead and check your credit reports. A couple other things to consider from the medical manufacturing side of things. So what I wanted to talk about now is a little bit less on the risk and more on the opportunity. On the left-hand side, you're looking at the percentage of medical manufacturing revenue. I acknowledge that this is a global marketplace. Just because the parts are made in a certain state doesn't mean the tools have to be made there or all of the parts have to be made there. California does have the bulk of the medical manufacturing revenue at about 25%. Then close behind that is Minnesota and then Pennsylvania, and then it starts to trickle off. I didn't put all 50 states on here. That would be a really scary chart, but you at least get a sense of where the top 10 are. On the right-hand side, I've given you the major medical manufacturers. So these are ultimately the people who are assembling and providing the parts to the hospitals. Instruments on the left-hand side, devices on the right-hand side. A couple of overlaps, Boston Scientific, J&J, a few others that do a lot in both spaces. What I tell you guys, for those of you who are in the medical market or considering going into it, these are great targets, these are potential opportunities, but these are massive companies, similar to what you see in the automotive sector or other sectors. Targeting this company, again, might be worth your while, but in our opinion, the better option, especially if you're starting into the medical market, is to find the smaller tier 2 medical molders. So there's many of them sitting in the Northeast, sitting on the West Coast, some of them sitting close to home here in the Detroit area. It's far more beneficial to get in with a tier 2 medical molder that's smaller, that's then supplying up to Boston Scientific, supplying up to J&J, than to go directly after these guys. Slightly selfish plug, but not really. If anybody is interested in meeting those tier 2s, so those lower molders, our organization is having an event at NPE for mold makers and molders, where we are trying to get the 2 of them to meet. So we're allowing 2 people from any mold maker and 2 people from any molder to come into the room to make connections to source tooling in the US, not the US, in the US and Canada. I appreciate all the Canadian mold makers out there as well. And part of that's going to be specifically on the medical side of things, because there's a lot of medical molders out there right now that are looking for hyper-specific tooling, whether it be silicone molding, whether it be some metal injection mold tooling that they can't find. For reference, I have medical molders who source their tools in Vienna because they just can't find a mold maker here that does that work. I'm over here saying, I know there's a mold maker here that does that work. Let me get their name for you and connect the 2 of you, but we can only do that so often. So that's why I say that going towards the tier 2 molder may be far more beneficial as a first step than going directly to one of these OEMs. These are the major earnings of the OEMs. This is just kind of a slide that I wanted to make sure if any of you look at this after the fact, you can see. J&J is doing the best from an overall revenue perspective of about $85 billion in 2023 revenue, and their profit is also doing really well. The key takeaway from this slide that I think is interesting, so this blue line is 2022 earnings for all of these OEMs. Orange line is 2023 earnings. All of their profitability went down year over year. They're still dealing with the aftermath and the challenges associated with COVID and all the changes it put into the marketplace, and their earnings are starting to take a hit. Many of them actually did really well when it was a lot of ventilator sales, a lot of testing kits, things of that nature. They're starting to feel the aftermath, and many of them are having to right-size their businesses. There are a lot of headlines out there that we're laying off in many of these sectors. That by no means is an indicator to me that we shouldn't go into them. It's more of understanding, okay, why did our profit go down by 6 points year over year? And then looking at what is our actual headcount that we need to get the work done, and where could we just trim the fat because we grew so much and we were running around with our hair on fire for 3 years during COVID and the aftermath. I really like this slide as well. Again, it's a little bit of an eye chart, so I apologize. But what you're looking at here is different key markets that we see within manufacturing, and then the North American market size for medical, and then also their global growth rate. So we've kind of tried to split it up for those of you in this room to injection molding, metal components, additive, and then mold die. Mold die total spend is expected to be about $3.3 billion. So it's pretty low from a total spend perspective, but not that different than you would see in additive or than you would see in metal components. Additive has by far the highest growth rate, 18% expected increase year over year. So a lot happening in that market. But all of these have really positive growth rate in the medical space as you go forward. Obviously, the mold number and the die number are directly correlated to injection molding in metal. We like to see more molds and dies being made so that we're turning over more parts so that our molding and metal forming customers can go ahead and launch new product and do really well at it. So again, just a little bit of insight, and then we listed some opportunities down here that we can share with any of you. What I kind of wanted to close out with, and then I'll talk about next steps, or at least what we see in the marketplace, is what we see from an estimated industry tool spend. Automotive is still the 800-pound gorilla in the room, so we estimate all of this tool spend ourselves. We take overall forecast from a production perspective, and then we back into tooling spend. Automotive tool spend at about $5.1 billion this year. We expect it to be a lot higher last year. For those of you who want more automotive tooling, we are bullish that it's coming back in 2025. Aircraft is slightly lower than that, but very similar, about 4.8. This medical instruments and devices is about 3.3 billion in total tooling spend. Still a really good market to be a part of. And that's in North America specifically. That's not global tooling spend. So for those of you who are trying to back into my percentage of revenue in that for the size of your business, if you're just in medical, there's probably opportunity for growth, but you probably also have competitors in the marketplace. Which brings me to kind of my parting shot. Barriers to entry. The medical market is a great opportunity and there's a lot of benefits to going into it, but it's not necessarily the easiest market to go into. There are barriers to entry within it. What we tried to do on here is kind of outline lower opportunity and lower barriers to entry, all the way up to high barriers to entry, but really high opportunities. It's directly correlated to clean room levels. So a lot of this class 1 device stuff, so things around the body, hospital beds, tongue depressors, things of that nature, good opportunity. Anybody in the larger medical mold building space, supplying to like a Hillrom or like a GE healthcare, if you think about like the big CAT scan machines, takes massive molds to build those big plastic parts that go on the side of them. If you haven't been in a CAT scan or MRI machine, good for you. Probably means you're very healthy, but I know many of us have. So if you think about all the plastic parts that are around you, all of those require medical molds. All of those are class 1 devices. Really great opportunity, but low barrier to entry, which also means slightly lower opportunity, right? Other people can come play in your space. If you think about a really big fascia mold builder or a really big heavy truck mold builder, they might be able to go in because they have the tonnage capacity or they have the crane capacity to shift into that market relatively easily. As you go up into some of the miniature manufacturing, or even micro molding in some cases, and into some of these class 3 instances, really small things, like I saw a knee implant out there that went from initial steel portion all the way down to the really highly machined aspect. That's where you have higher barriers to entry. Obviously, the machines cost more money. Obviously, your customers have higher expectations, higher quality standards, but also there's higher opportunity for you at the end of the day. So my parting shot to you guys, we at our organization like to talk a lot about strategic sales processes. The medical market is a great market. Hopefully I've given you a little bit of intel into it today. But at the end of the day, just going back into your businesses tomorrow or on Monday doesn't mean that you can say, hey, we're going to go into medical and then just start doing it. You need a strategic sales process associated with it. So maybe this has started the discussion of identifying a target market for you. So there's the initial target market. But at the end of the day, you also have to go in and analyze your own data to understand where you're making money right now. Are you making money on the medical molds that you're doing? Are you making more money with specific clients than others? Are you losing money with certain clients? Also, what are you doing from a sales planning perspective? Do you have the salespeople on staff to sell into the medical space? Do you need to hire them? Do you need to develop them internally? What's your marketing plan? If you're marketing to tier 2 molders of medical devices or the medical manufacturer, you probably have a different marketing plan than if you're marketing to Ford or GM or GE appliances, all of those types of things. And then the last piece, you have to figure out the pricing and quoting model. You've got to quote based off what the market will bear. What the market will bear in medical might be very different than what the market will bear in automotive. So how do you have your quoting practices keeping up with you to make sure that at the end of the day, you're making a lot of money and that funnels into a really positive operations plan? So this is kind of our little circle that we like to utilize to talk about the intricacies associated with saying, hey, I want to go into the medical market. Great idea. Let's talk about what that means. Ultimately, you've got to identify what your strategic niche is, right? So you could say that your niche is already an industry, or maybe it's a commodity or it's a technology, right? I know some really great silicone mold builders that do a lot in the medical space, but also do a lot in the consumer packaging space because very few mold builders do that. They don't necessarily have an industry niche. They have a technology niche because they can do a specific type of mold building. So just ask yourself that question as you go forward into when you're considering the potentials or if you're already in the medical industry. With that, I just want to end with a couple kind of questions or things that I would do if I were you guys going back into your businesses for those of you who are already in medical or considering going into medical. First off, and this probably comes as no surprise after showing you the last couple of slides, please analyze your own data. Your data tells a story. It's going to tell you what's happening within your business. Look at your margin by part. Look at your overall revenue by part. Look at it by customer. Look at it by facility if you have multiple facilities. Have a data analyst that's really good in Excel. Cut the data as many ways as possible and then see what it shows you because I think it'll show you something interesting. You got to define and communicate your strategy to your sales team. Just because someone says we want to go into medical doesn't mean that we immediately know how to do it. We also need to evaluate the existing sales process. What good relationships do we have? Where are our weaknesses and opportunities for improvement? You can only implement so many things at a time. So that's one thing that I like to make sure is clear when we have presentations like this. Really exciting, lots of growth in the marketplace, let's go do it. But just going back and immediately implementing all of these aspects of it, really challenging. So make a decision and strategically decide what you can bite off and chew right now versus what's going to happen in 2025, 2026, 2027, and beyond. The last piece that I would say is if you're an executive or if you're a higher level leader in this room, I would take an active role in that sales plan. Just because you say that we're going to go into medical, you got to be a part of that sales planning process as well. At the end of the day, it really all does come back to strong and solid leadership. If we're not leading our businesses in the right direction and into whatever direction we want to go in, then we're probably setting ourselves up to not be as successful as we otherwise could be. These are our partners. Obviously, Makino is up there front and center. We really couldn't do what we do without these guys. We adore being here. We adore being a part of the event. So I really want to say thank you to them. And then also, we can't do what we do without the rest of our partners. So a lot of important people.
Okay. Cara, I'd like to toss a couple questions at you, get your responses if you've got a few minutes.
Sure.
And the first one is, how vulnerable is the medical manufacturing business due to outsourcing overseas?
Yeah. So I think at a high level, any industry, especially in the mold and die market, is going to be vulnerable to outsourcing, right? Unfortunately, we have a expectation here of low pricing when it comes to mold and die tooling, as well as when it comes to parts, right? This isn't just a tooling issue, but I know a lot of this is focused on mold and die in the contract machining space. That being said, I do think medical is a little bit more insulated than other markets when it comes to outsourcing. So in many cases, medical manufacturers are really going to focus on supply chain resiliency after the challenges we had during COVID-19, right? We had many businesses that were pivoting into making ventilators and other things like that. And there was realization both from the medical device OEMs and the manufacturers, as well as from the federal government that, hey, we can't have all this reliance in China and in other areas of Asia. We have to have some of the capability to build certain medical devices and products here in North America as well. So I think it's a little bit more insulated. It's definitely more insulated than the automotive industry would be, or than the appliance industry and a couple others. But there's still risk, right? I mean, being in the medical market does not mean that you've just minimized the global marketplace dynamic. You still have global marketplaces. You still have to compete with other countries and be competitive on that scale. But it's definitely less of an impact than it is in some other mold and die industries.
Okay. Next one is there a trend for medical mold makers branching out to include part manufacturing and injection molding in their operations?
Yeah, the short answer there is yes. The kind of more elaborate answer there is that that's not just happening in medical. So absolutely, we are seeing some medical mold and some medical mold and dye manufacturers expanding into other things, whether it be some short run production, whether it be some type of automation, whether it be some type of assembly work. But that's not just a medical thing. So in general, there's a trend that's continuing to occur where mold and dye makers throughout industries are expanding. And the reason for that, if I were to kind of draw a chart with my finger, and many people in the mold and dye industry know this, is that those mold and dye makers have revenue that goes like this. It's very ebbs and flows, right? I talked about it in the presentation. Cash conversion is really challenging. It takes a long time for us to collect our money. In many cases, we have PPAP terms. So especially if you're in automotive, so you put something out and you don't get paid for an extended period of time. You have these challenges when it comes to consistency of revenue. So the desire and the reason that many mold and dye makers are going into going into other process types, not necessarily other industries, is so that they have the ability to normalize some of that revenue. So they have some consistency of revenue below those peaks and valleys that come with being in the tooling industry. In medical specifically, though, just to stay specific on that topic for a second, within those mold and dye makers, I do think it's important if anybody is considering doing something else, right, doing medical molding, that you ensure how you're communicating that to your customers. At the end of the day, again, in any industry, but specific to medical in this case, if you are building the molds or the dyes, oftentimes we see more mold makers in the medical space than dye makers domestically. But if you're building the molds or dyes, and then you're also going to go produce parts, make sure that it's very clear to your customers that you're selling the molds and dyes to, that you are not becoming their competitor. That would be a really big challenge and could potentially have some negative impacts to you getting sourced additional tooling, depending on the circumstances and how you market that out.
Okay, you mentioned the medical market was cooling off in certain areas. What does that mean for the future forecast?
Yeah, so I actually am currently looking at the benchmarking study output that I referenced in that presentation. So what that means is that I have the ability to share some additional updates with you. So the benchmarking study that will actually be sent out to all respondents, ideally early next week. The team is working tirelessly on it as we speak. That data, which was collected in the April, May, and June timeframe of this year, showed us that the medical market is cooling off or slowing down. So what does that mean? To us, when we kind of articulate a market, we focus on 4 key things. One of them is performance to actual. So the average respondent to this study told us that performance to actual from 2022 to 2023 for the medical market is about as expected. So we said, hey, we think we're going to do X revenue in medical in 2024. And on average, we're sitting there. Good news, we're not substantially above it or below it. But the reason why we say that it's cooling a little bit is the average manufacturer in the medical market did tell us that they expect both revenue and profit to go down from 2023 to 2024. Now, some of that could be due to other market dynamics. We have higher costs of doing business still. We still have a lot of material cost increases and inflationary cost increases. But some of that is also due to the overall marketplace. We are seeing a bit of a slowdown in terms of demand for certain areas within medical. Now, I encourage you, when you think about a coolness in the market, to make sure that you're comparing it to 2019. Because what happened is in 2021 and 2022, and even portions of 2023, we saw a massive shift in the type of medical devices and tools that we were sourcing because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But then we also saw a massive increase in demand and innovation. So we're slowing down a little bit from that high in some areas, but it's still doing quite well as a marketplace. It's still strong. There's still a lot of work to be had, and there's still a lot of profit to be had. Again, if we tie it back to the slightly more insulated opportunity for sourcing domestically with less competition from low-cost country sources, medical has an opportunity there. We have an opportunity for innovation. We have an opportunity to do something differently than before, and some higher level niches, and oftentimes some very high cavitation work that could allow us, if we build the tool well, to improve from a profitability perspective too. So I think still a positive market to be in, but wanted to make that clear.
Sure. Lastly, if a mold maker wants to get into the medical market, where should they start?
Yeah, that does tend to be the age-old question, right? That was the joke I made in the presentation as well, that if I could just get a slide that says, hey, here are all the medical device manufacturers, here's who in their company sources molds or dyes, just give them a call, then we'd all be sitting pretty. Unfortunately, we still don't have that data. But what I would encourage mold and die makers or anybody looking to go into the medical space to do first is to evaluate what types of medical tools or medical parts you want to make. At the end of the day, medical is a big industry, just like all the other ones. There are copious different types of parts within it. There's two-shot molds, there's stack molds, there's high cavitation, there's low cavitation. I don't know all of the things that there are, but I know there are many. There's big molds, there's small molds, there's all of the above. So what that means is first to evaluate in your own business, what do you do well? How does that apply to medical? And then frankly, do the research. It takes work. It takes some scraping of the internet. It takes useful market intelligence and market research by outside sources, not to promote Wipfli or the prior Harbour Results team, but obviously we do this type of work consistently because many businesses are trying to get into the medical space or other spaces. But in the day, you have to say, okay, here's what I know I do well. Here's the types of devices or products that applies to the medical market. Here's the type of company that makes those devices and products, and then work to understand who are the suppliers, who are, if you're in molds, who are the plastics processors that are supplying into whomever this company may be. And then from there, understand, okay, how do I get in the door with them? Do I need to attend a MAP event, the Manufacturing Associations for Plastics Processors, because they have a bunch of tier 2 molders in the room? Do I need to attend an AMBA event for the American Mold Builders Association to better understand who else is doing medical mold building? Do I need to attend a event on the East Coast because I know the major medical OEM that I'm interested in has headquarters there and there's going to be other suppliers there? Get creative with your sales team in terms of how you can go out and target this market, and then start there and then continue through the process. But at the end of the day, step one is, what do I do well? So understanding your data within your own business, and then how do I apply that into this marketplace?
Okay, I appreciate it, Cara. For the attendees, this will be archived in the Makino.com webinar archive, past archives in the near future. And appreciate everybody's attendance and enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody at Makino.